The triumph of the Ottoman Empire. By the time Mehmet II took the throne in 1451 at age 19, the Ottoman Empire was by far the premier power in southeastern Europe and Anatolia. It was multi-ethnic, flexible and powerful. There was perhaps no man who better represented that empire than Mehmet. He was fluent in at least 6 languages that were spoken throughout his domain. Special emphasis was placed on Islam, and scholars were greatly prized. The empire literally and figuratively bridged the gap between Europe and Asia, and Mehmet placed much emphasis on bringing together the intellectual legacies of both. During his reign, scholars of traditional Islamic sciences were patronized along with European Christian artists. Mehmet was reminiscent of earlier Muslim leaders such as Harun al-Rashid and Salah al-Din, who were masters of knowledge, leadership and military prowess. But there were 2 major thorns in Mehmet's side. One was his relative inexperience. He was young when he took the throne, and was thus naturally distrusted by elder statesmen that had served under his father. In fact, Mehmet briefly held power once before, at the age of 12, when his father abdicated, to live a peaceful life of retirement. But that first reign ended when his own grand vizier, who brought back his father, overthrew him. When Mehmet came to power a second time after his father's death, doubts abounded in government and society about his ability to hold on to the throne. In order to prove his worth as Sultan of the mighty empire, Mehmet realized he had to rid himself of the second thorn, Constantinople. The city was situated almost exactly in the middle of the empire. Although it was no longer nearly as powerful as it once was, it still had the ability to harass Ottoman trade and military movements. From a practical standpoint, it had to be eliminated. But there was also a religious element to the city. The Prophet Muhammad had predicted 800 years before that Muslims would one day conquer it, and that the leader and the army that did so would be wonderful indeed. Soon after taking power, Mehmet began making preparations to fulfill that prophecy. Doing so would strengthen the Ottoman Empire in his own position as its sultan. Despite Constantinople's relative weakness, it was still a fortress that had never been breached. Its defenses were seemingly impenetrable. The city was surrounded on 3 sides by water. Its land side was defended by the enormous Theodosian walls, built in the 400s as a set of 2 walls that were as high as 12 meters and as thick as 6 meters. In their 1,000 years, Constantinople's walls had seen countless armies disintegrate in its shadow, including the earliest Umayyad sieges in the late 7th century. More recent attempts by Bayezid I and Murad II also ended in failure. If Mehmet wanted to be the leader that Muhammad had spoken so highly of, he needed new techniques and new armies to get the job done. A few kilometers north of the city, he built a fortress on the banks of the Bosphorus Strait, across from an earlier one built by his great-grandfather Bayezid I. The dual fortresses became a chokehold on the waterway, preventing the Byzantines from seeking reinforcements from the Black Sea region. To combat the city's massive walls, Mehmet commissioned a Hungarian engineer to build the largest cannon the world had yet seen. The Ottomans were familiar with gunpowder, which made its way into the Muslim world from China in the previous centuries, but it had never been a decisive element in previous conquests. Mehmet's cannon was over 8 meters in length and could launch a 250-kilogram ball, 1.5 kilometers. The world's strongest wall needed the world's most powerful cannon to bring it down. On top of that, Mehmet recruited an army from Ottoman forces in Europe and Asia that numbered over 100,000 soldiers, including Christians from vassal states in the Balkans. Mehmet was going all in on his gamble. With such preparations, failure to take the city could result in the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire itself. Within Constantinople, divisions were arising that would play out in favor of the young sultan. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI believed they could only survive the coming siege by seeking the help of the Catholic Church. Many in Constantinople, however, were still bitter at the destruction the city experienced at the hands of Catholic crusaders in the 13th century, and a faction of Orthodox Christians arose that openly opposed any cooperation with the West. Despite the contingents of Italian soldiers that made their way to Constantinople to aid in its defense, the inherent disunity in the city would prove to be one of the reasons for its eventual downfall. Although he took Constantinople by force, Mehmet did not impose Islam on the city's inhabitants. They were free to continue to practice religion as they did before the conquest. In April of 1453, Mehmet's army arrived at the walls of the legendary city. The few thousand defenders of the city managed to put up a valiant defense from behind the massive fortifications. But in the end, the constant bombardment, repeated attempts at going over or through the walls, and an ingenious strategy that involved carrying 70 Ottoman ships over 2 kilometers of land and into the city's harbor all led to eventual capture. On May 29, 1453, a Muslim army finally conquered the legendary city. Mehmet, thereafter known as the Conqueror, made the city his capital. The Ottoman Empire no longer had a thorn in its side, and Mehmet's fame spread throughout the Muslim world as the powerful ruler of an upstart empire that finally fulfilled the 800-year-old prophecy. At this point, there was no doubting the Ottoman Empire's position atop the Muslim world, after the destruction of Baghdad 195 years earlier, which plunged the Muslim world into its deepest lows in history. Muslims had risen again to expand their borders and reach into new frontiers. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople was more than a military victory over an old enemy. It also symbolized the resurgence of the Muslim world as an imperial and multicultural force. It had been centuries since the conquests of the Rashidun and the Umayyads opened up new lands to Islam. In those early years, as Muslims conquered ancient cities such as Damascus, Ctesiphon, and Toledo, they created a new amalgamated culture, which brought together Islam and local traditions. The Ottomans in Constantinople, which became popularly known as Istanbul, brought that practice back. In the new Ottoman capital, the cultural traditions of the Byzantines, Romans and Greeks found new life in an Islamic context. A prime example of these cultures mixing remains visible today in Istanbul's skyline. The ancient Hagia Sophia Church, built in the 500s by Byzantine Emperor Justinian, was for centuries a symbol of Christian Byzantine power. After the Ottoman conquest, it was converted into a mosque, but remained the centerpiece of the city, with its gigantic dome serving as an inspiration and a model for Ottoman architects. Imperial mosques commissioned by sultans such as Mehmet II, Suleiman, and Ahmed I all borrowed the motif of a giant central dome, although adapted for Islamic use with tall, thin minarets and Arabic calligraphy inside instead of Christian figural art. Like in earlier Islamic history, conquest did not mean the replacement of one civilization with another, but the creation of a new one based on the cultures of both.